Welcome back to People in the News. Alanis Morissette made her name as rock's angry young woman with her unprecedented debut album, Jagged Little Pill. But there's a lot more to Alanis than angst and heartbreak. It's been quite a journey from teen pop star to the soul-searching songwriter she is today. Here again is Kira Phillips.
It's some justice.
When she exploded on the music scene in 1995, Alanis Morissette was dubbed a prophet, the voice of a generation. Her Jagged Little Pill, anything but hard to swallow.
I didn't grow up on Carole King, but to me this was my Jagged Little Pill.
Generation X couldn't agree more, taking ownership in the blisteringly honest, sometimes X-rated album to the tune of 30 million sales. At the age of just 21, Alanis Morissette had the biggest selling female debut of all time.
Very overwhelming, very exciting, hugely defining. Literally every 2 seconds I was being given an opportunity to really define who I was. And I wasn't entirely sure who I was, so therein lay some of the struggle during those years.
Jagged Little Pill's ride would have its repercussions: exhaustion, withdrawal, and a less than stellar follow-up.
You know, it was almost a curse because it was so successful that her next album, in comparison, was a complete flop.
And now she's back. Last year's Under Rug Swept and the single Hands Clean topped the charts in 15 countries, 11 tracks written and produced entirely on her own.
Under Rug Swept, it says that she's here for good, that she's going to be an artist who's not just some sort of kid phenomena, but that she's a singer-songwriter worth following through her adulthood.
An adulthood that has run the gamut from teen pop star to angst-ridden superstar. Alanis Nadine Morissette was born on June 1st, 1974 in Ottawa, Canada, 3 years after brother Chad and just 12 minutes after her twin, Wade.
I grew up in a very masculine environment. So I was around a lot of men, my brothers and their friends. There's just a lot of guys around.
Georgia and Alan Morissette were teachers and raised the 3 children in a seemingly idyllic Canadian home.
Somewhat patriarchal, very communicative. We didn't really watch television. We had to read half an hour a day, and we were only allowed to watch half an hour's worth of television.
But movies were allowed. By 4, Alanis developed an obsession with the 1978 film Grease. 2 years later, she took up the piano.
I started playing piano when I was 6, and I knew that I wanted to be involved in that form of expression, whether it was through music or acting or dancing or painting or writing. You know, I was always writing all the time.
Opportunity came in the form of a local folk singer, Lindsay Morgan, a friend of the family who made a living making music.
And I used to peek my head in through the emergency exit door to just watch them, because obviously I wasn't allowed in.
So the twins stood there, and especially to this day I can still see Alanis standing there. I can see her eyes.
So I thought, okay, so you can love what you do. This is exciting. So I just started writing, and I didn't think it was unusual or odd at all.
2 years later, in 1984, an audio cassette, this audio cassette, landed in Morgan's mailbox. On the tape, the rough beginnings of a song.
There was a line that came out, "Fate Stay With Me." I remember thinking, this is not just a little girl singing words, there's something there. It was unstructured. It was like words after another, but it was there. I talked to Alanis and I said, write some more.
Months later, Morgan was shocked by his protege's progress.
And she came down with a book, this notebook, and she hesitated and she said, "I promise you won't laugh." And I remember saying, "Alanis, I'm not going to laugh."
1, 2, 3. You found the right man in the right place. Once in a while you meet him face to face.
And I remember sitting there, and I remember feeling the hair come up on the back of my neck. And she just went right through the song. I knew right then that there was something incredible here.
Her first big break came in the spring of 1985. 10-year-old Alanis landed a role on the Canadian children's show You Can't Do That on Television.
There's one thing I know, it's how to get attention at a party. Well, come on, Alanis!
Using money earned from the show, Alanis and 42-year-old Morgan formed a label. Her first single, a recorded, mastered version of the song left in his mailbox.
I think we printed up 2,000 copies of it and pretty much gave all of them away. I think I sold 3 of them.
Although the single received little airplay, it did provide exposure. And at 13, Alanis took home the top prize at a local TV station talent search. But finally, in 1988, fate stepped in. The single Too Hot debuted in the spring of 1991. Her debut album, Alanis, quickly went platinum. There were tours and sexy videos like Feel Your Love. Coming up, from Pop-Tart to Queen of Angst, I know the version of me. Alanis Morissette is radically transformed by a jagged little pill. It's an about-face that many people will question.
Anytime you sell that many records, you're going to have naysayers. And from the beginning, there were people who thought she's a fraud.
Now back to People in the News.
With big hair, shoulder pads, and hits like Feel Your Love, by 1991, Alanis Morissette was Canada's Queen of Pop. But with that label came a nickname she despised.
She would kill you if you ever compared her to Debbie Gibson.
And I think she came out the other side of it wanting to be real, wanting to be herself, not some sort of Canadian Debbie Gibson.
Her second album, Now Is the Time, hit the stores in October of 1992. Audiences were in for a surprise. With ballads like No Apologies, the album was less glitz and much more thoughtful. The result? A flop.
I knew that I wouldn't stop in terms of looking for someone to collaborate with until I felt like I was being myself, whatever that was.
The wait wouldn't be long. In the winter of 1994, she headed to Los Angeles. There, she was introduced to producer Glenn Ballard.
We were laughing and having a cup of tea within 5 minutes, and then 10 minutes later, kind of diving into a creative no man's land, really.
I thought, wow, here's someone that I can delve into some subject matters that may offend or trigger or bother some other collaborators. Glenn was embracing it, and he was saying, keep on, let's do it.
And with that creative pairing, barriers collapsed. Hidden anger and frustration from the past poured out, and the music flowed freely.
It took a minute or two for me to come out of my shell, and then once I did, I thought, okay, this is who I am.
We were in the middle of writing another song, and for whatever reason, I think we got bored or frustrated with a particular passage, and I just went to an E sus, and then resolved it. And she said, sometimes. And then I went up to an F sharp minor 9. It's never quite enough.
There was a part of me that was like, I'm sick of walking on eggshells and being
Perfect. Then you're in my love. So she jumps the melody up a whole step there, which is really brilliant.
So it was this inner conflict of, wanting to be a people-pleasing, perfect girl.
Don't forget to win first place. Don't forget to win first place. It was like, okay, I don't know what's going on here, but this is great. I mean, because she's coming up with it on the spot.
A part of me that just wanted to be authentic and raw and, not lie.
And that whole overwhelming sense of childhood sort of pouring down on you, I think she had encapsulated in 4 bars. So it was a beautiful moment.
If you're perfect, I want you to know.
In the coming weeks, the album seemed to write itself. Locking themselves in the studio, 12 songs emerged, in some cases a song a day. And when Jagged Little Pill was released in June of 1995, it immediately caused a stir.
Anytime somebody mentions oral sex in a movie, their ears prick up and listen, no pun intended. Like, who is this? Who the heck is this chick?
The song was You Oughta Know, taken directly from Alanis's journal, a scathing ode to an ex-boyfriend.
I was worried about some of the subject matter in it. And I remember Glenn turning to me and saying, "Is this how you feel?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, then don't change a damn thing."
But there were detractors, especially when her Canadian Pop-Tart past was discovered by the press.
I was blindsided by someone from the LA Times. He started asking questions like, how come those first 2 albums that you made aren't available anymore, and are you embarrassed by them?
People assumed that Glenn Ballard had created this persona for her and created this music for her.
The idea that I did anything other than just empower what was already there ignores the fact that she's just an enormously talented singer, gifted lyricist, powerful personality, and a very spiritual and strong person.
Naysayers aside, there was no denying the momentum. 4 Grammys later, Jagged Little Pill was on its way to selling 30 million copies, the biggest female artist debut of all time.
And it was so scary and so great, and I was humbled and blown away. It was just a catapulting into who are you-ness. Who are you in the face of this mayhem?
Coming up, after 2 years on the road, the enormity of Jagged Little Pill blindsides Alanis, forcing her to take a break.
The rest of the world around her was going crazy. People were expecting her to save a generation, and that was just not going to happen.
CNN, the most trusted name in news. Welcome back to People in the News.
I had no choice but to hear you.
By the winter of 1996, the world, it seemed, had fallen head over feet for 22-year-old Alanis Morissette.
What a jagged little pill.
The Jagged Little Pill tour had taken her around the world twice, and with 30 million albums sold, 6 top 40 hits, and 4 Grammys, the Canadian transplant was being called the most successful new female artist in pop music history.
She sold 30 million records with a very intense, psychological, artful, non-pandering piece of work. That's really unprecedented.
But with newfound icon status bearing down upon her, pressure was building. Fame, it seemed, was not everything she thought it would be.
I didn't laugh for about 2 years. One has to almost experience it to be able to truly see that it doesn't offer what it's touted as being able to offer.
Alanis Morissette.
Alanis Morissette.
The wild ride had to stop, and as the Jagged Little Pill juggernaut approached its 2nd year with no sign of slowing down, a decision was made. The tour would end. And on December 14th, 1996, a visibly drained Alanis said goodbye to her fans, hugged her bandmates, and set off to find herself. In the coming months, friends and family were met by an altogether different Alanis, closed off and distant.
I think she started to maybe isolate herself a little bit from some of the people she was very close to. I could sense that something was amiss, something was wrong.
Adding to the pressure, the industry was pushing for another album. Paralyzed by expectations, those closest to her say she nearly walked away.
We went to see her down in Los Angeles. I remember saying I thought of walking away from it many times. It's that brutal.
With the help of yoga and Eastern spirituality, Alanis turned inward. And following a life-altering trek to India in January of 1998, she began to write again. When she returned to Glenn Ballard's studio months later, the angst was behind her, and a peaceful Alanis Morissette walked in.
When she walked in the door that day, we went right to it, and within an hour, there it was. It was the song that had the easiest time being created And that certainly was, I think, a gift to me from her through India.
Thank you, India.
The album's supposed former infatuation junkie was released on November 3rd, 1998. Like Jagged Little Pill, autobiographical, but something was different. The anger was gone, and fans didn't know what to think.
On Jagged Little Pill, it was all about everybody in the world related to this record, particularly young women. On the second record, her experiences were things that no one else could relate to.
The 17-track album sold 10 million copies, just 1/3 of what Jagged had taken in.
Immediately, they talked about the sophomore jinx, which was rubbish. I mean, this was, you know, if any other person had that album out at the time, they would have been deliriously happy.
By the spring of 2002, Alanis, the singer-songwriter, returned. This time, however, there was a hitch. No collaborations, no producers. Her third album was all her own and aptly titled Under Rug Swept.
A lot of people were, I think, expecting her to fall on her face and come up with something inferior. I think it's one of the best things she's ever done.
Rocketing to #1 the first week in release, its debut single, Hands Clean, immediately sparked controversy.
Beginning at age 14, she started dating a much older man who she hasn't named, and it bothered her for years. It's really a no-holds-barred song. I mean, the lyrics are pretty intense and they're pretty incriminating.
It's a song about a relationship that I was not emotionally prepared to kind of deal with at the time. So I wanted to speak the truth about it without seeking revenge of any sort, but seeking the liberation that comes from my speaking the truth.
It seems honesty will always be at the core of Alanis Morissette, learning through the music just as audiences continue to live by the words. And although Under Rug Swept sales at 3 million to date is nowhere near 30 million, by all indications, her story is far from over, and truth continues to set her free.
I'll be happy right.
Alanis has a lot to say.
Her voice is clearly one of the great instruments for expressing just about anything that she may be thinking about.
This is a woman who has a story she wants to tell, and I think she'll spend a lifetime telling the story.
I'll be writing songs till I die. There's just no question.
In addition to working on a new album, Alanis has just lent her voice to the soundtrack for a new movie about the legendary Cole Porter. That's it for this edition of People in the News. Coming up next week, the Royals on the anniversary of their mother's death. A look at William and Harry. I'm Paula Zahn. Thanks so much for joining us.
For more on the people and personalities shaping our world,